Well, hello, everybody at South by Southwest. What better way to kick off March Madness than a conversation about the changing the guard in sports media? Everything's changing at a rapid pace, lots of disruption, a lot of things are happening that affect people both on the advertising side and the platform side. And we're going to dive into that reality today with three experts that I think you'll love to hear from each of them. Let me introduce our panel. First of all, my name is Rich Calacci. I serve as a Chief Revenue Officer at Overtime. And with me today is Snap's Chief Marketing Officer, Kenny Mitchell, our co-founder and managing partner of Imagination Capital, Rachel Lam, and Quicken Loans and Rocket Mortgage's Chief Marketing Officer, Casey Hurbis. Casey, we'll start with you. You know, most recently we saw some amazing things you did as a brand around Rocket Mortgage and tied to the Super Bowl. Obviously, you've made a huge investment in and around the NFL and other professional leagues. But as you think about this under 35-year-old audience who's watching for shorter durations and probably less frequently on television, how do you think about that younger demographic, knowing you want to engage them with great connectivity and be able to tell your story on behalf of Rocket Mortgage?
Yeah, hey, Rich, and great question. I mean, we just did come off a really successful Super Bowl campaign for Rocket Mortgage and activating our Rocket Mortgage Super Bowl Squares our second year with the NFL. I think the pandemic, going back a year ago, like literally right now, it really provides some interesting insights as a marketer. We're fortunate at Rocket Mortgage to be an always-on advertiser, and as we moved into work in place and businesses, and were closed in March of last year, we immediately saw media consumption changing, and it wasn't just with the under 35 crowd. We saw the 35 crowd plus as well. I mean, you saw programming habits change, and certainly a larger shift to the digital and social space. And so as an always-on advertiser, we needed to make sure that we pivoted at the speed of the game, which was right there. And so, we were able to take our message, change our messaging, but also pivot with the media. So as we saw consumption in the digital and social space shift more towards that, OTT and CTV, we were there. And we're a big believer that, even though, the linear and the broadcast is still highest reach, highest mass medium. I mean, it's not lost that everybody is shifting that conversation to that second or third screen, right? Whether it be Twitter, Snapchat, different social media platforms. And so we want to make sure as a brand that we're going to have a large linear presence, but also how do you have that continued conversation, with fans that are having, continued conversation or consumption, right? We just saw that with the Super Bowl, the highest streaming sporting event ever, on that second or third screen. So a lot of it is just understanding where the market is, and as an advertiser, trying to put yourself in the right place at the right time.
It makes a lot of sense. And when you think about those advertising investments, on the back side of it is a lot of actual financial investments in the platforms and digital companies that bring those opportunities forward. And we're really lucky to have Rachel Lam with us today, who serves as the co-founder and managing partner of Imagination Capital. And Rachel and I go way back many years to our days at Time Warner together. And Rachel, I think, there's an interesting opportunity for you to bring your point of view to the table. As Casey mentioned, there's a massive increase in consumption on both digital and social platforms. You get to see the baby pictures of all these companies before they're ever, all grown up. So as you think about, the media space and what you did at Time Warner in 2003, and what you're doing currently, how does this impact and affect how you evaluate investments and where you put your money on the table when you think about the things that Casey has said and what you're seeing with your own two eyes?
So if you think about the pandemic, I'd start there, and sports shut down, and we all got to see a moment where there was no sports. And I don't know about you guys, but when in July, when the NBA bubble restarted, there was like a feeling of relief that life was normal again, that there was something to take me outside of myself and my small day-to-day life, that something to root for again, something to be passionate about, other people's stories that I could care about, other communities I could be part of as a fan, the fandom, that the sense of community that you get from being a fan is almost like nothing else. And it is the stories of the players, and it is all of that when you think of sports, why it is such a big business and why it will continue. And it will continue, I think, in the near term, very much in the current formats that it is right now because of the economics of sports, right? But I think that it was important for me when I thought about this panel is to remember that it is it is incredibly important. I mean, I think that we all take for granted that we have all these things to, it's almost like it's normal again, 6 months later. But the reality is that when it was gone, it was a huge void. And so then when you think about that and why is it so important, and then you think of it as a business, right? So I think as a person, I find it to be a really important part of my identity. And then you think of it as an investor and you think about the business side of it. It is a business that has incredibly large audiences of scale, simultaneous, live, that is very, very difficult to replicate in a lot of other mediums. It is a proven medium, linear television, to convert into, to get people to buy your product, to build a brand. It has proven metrics. And so people are always astounded at how linear television continues to, thrive with sports on it. But it is because of the licensing deals that have also contracted, right? You spent $5 billion for the NFL extension. You spent 2.7 billion for the NBA. You've got $1.5 billion for MLB. And those are long-term contracts. They keep them on those outlets. And then it makes it very hard for these incumbents, or very hard for these insurgents, the new entrants, to come in and break into that and into that business. And so, but it continues to be an important part of, I think, our culture and our identity. It's an incredible format for revenues, to drive brands, to sell licensing for the leagues themselves, to create community, and to sell tickets and merchandise. And so it's a big business that is a land of giants. And when I think of investing into companies that can actually break into this land of giants, it's very few entities that can really do that with any kind of scale. And so sports investing, I think, is very difficult. I think that when I look at the players that can come in, there are very few. There isn't a true technology that really enables you to come in and build viral audience that easily. Very few can do it. Overtime was one, and it is one of the reasons why Dick Parsons and I invested in Overtime, because they were able to, or Rich, you were able to take a technology, take an app, and actually create user-generated content. And the magic of Overtime was its ability to create an authentic brand that was resonant with Gen Z viewers very early on. It's really, really difficult to do. You can see how people can spend millions and millions of dollars and get to that brand, but somehow Overtime was able to do it very early on and was able to then get a scale audience without the cost of licensing sports rights, which is, it's magical. And so that's one of the things that gets something like that venture backed. The venture world is usually not the place, I think, for capital for sports startups. I think that private equity can play better because of the capital intensivity of the sports world. If you look at where venture activity does happen, it tends to be around the major sports. It's esports, it's fitness, it's lifestyle, and sometimes now it's sports betting. And then you as an investor have to figure out, do you want to be in gambling, right? And so I think data analytics is another area. And I think that with sports betting coming up, that's going to be another area for investment. But I think that, when you go straight at the major sports right now, I think that it's a very unique team that needs to be there to navigate amongst the giants. We also have an investment in a company called Buzzer, which is trying to do something very interesting for Gen Z viewing. And so I think and that entity is interesting because it's trying to go after a microtransactions model, which I do think there is a way to capture new forms of viewing with different business models that can still work around the existing license deals that most of the major media companies already control.
Got it. Well, lots to chew on there. I want to get Kenny involved in the conversation because Kenny, you and I can talk about sports till we're blue in the face, but we're here to talk about business. And you've had the privilege of being both on the big brand side during your time at McDonald's and Gatorade, and now on the other side of the ledger, working as a chief marketing officer for Snap. When you think about all these disruptions and you think about, Kenny the advertiser as opposed to, Kenny the QSR brand or Kenny the CPG brand. How do all these changes affect the way you look at the world? Understanding, of course, that clearly live sports are part of the mix, but they're a lot more expensive than they used to be relative to other opportunities in entertainment. And I would just love to get, a couple minutes from you on thinking about this audience under 35 and what these advertising opportunities, both from the brand side and also what you're currently doing at Snap.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the question. I have been fortunate to have helped to, shepherd tons of globally iconic brands that have like strong heritage in the sports space. So from Gatorade being on the sidelines of most championship moments to McDonald's and the McDonald's All-American game. What's really interesting with Snap as a communications and content platform is that we have the role of helping our community enjoy the things that they love. And many of them have huge passions for sports. With our community and with our generation, we are often like the second screen for sports viewing. So it's very common for us to see like really interesting spikes in both like engagement as well as like the type of content that's being discussed with friends around huge sporting moments, around big cultural moments. The other thing that's really interesting with our community is that we've seen tremendous success with sports content. So I think one of the powers of sports that have been talked about here is it's one of the few kind of synchronous, programs and activities that folks tend to view together. But we're also seeing like a big burgeoning trend around kind of like asynchronous consumption of sports content. And folks that do particularly well with that from a Snap perspective are ones who are partners who really understand how to storytell for mobile, which is really key. And it's something that Rich, you and the team at Overtime should know incredibly well, because Overtime does really well on our platform in terms of that synchronous sports related storytelling, and doing it with like a kind of like a unique voice, a unique perspective, and a unique point of view. So that's where we're seeing a flood of kind of like engagement, a flood of interest is particularly in our sports, our sports programming from that perspective. The other thing that we're seeing a good bit of, Rich, is particularly during this time with the pandemic, is people are kind of craving an opportunity to feel that connection to that live sport experience and a connection to sporting brands. So we've actually been leveraging our AR capabilities to help bring some of that to life. One good example of that was with the NBA during the bubble that was going on that Rachel mentioned. We actually partnered with the NBA to leverage AR to allow people to see and experience what it felt like to be in the gym for the bubble. So literally we created, the floors, the hardwood floors from the courts, the court stanchion, kind of the signage, the bench experience that you actually can see from home using AR. So being able to storytell in that way and kind of connect consumers, particularly in a time where you can't be live, has been a huge benefit and a trend that we have certainly witnessed over the last few years and expect will continue.
Great, thanks for that, Kenny. Just so you know, I had my first ever cheesesteak. I was down near your alma mater in Philadelphia this weekend. I had a nice cheesesteak, and I was thinking about you back then.
Where was your cheesesteak from? We got to like test the quality here.
I went to Pat's across from Gino's. It was pretty tasty.
Okay, that's acceptable. We'll take that.
All right, well, Casey, I want to come back around the horn to you. So at Overtime, we think a lot about these pivotal moments or seminal moments in somebody's development as a young adult. Getting your driver's license at 16, getting the right to vote, which is incredibly and increasingly important at the age of 18, legal drinking age at 21, and of course, where it arrives at your doorstep, which is buying your first home, hopefully under the age of 30. Advertising plays a really disruptive role in how people think about these opportunities. And I see everything you're doing at Rocket Mortgage really on the cutting edge. So how do you think about being a disruptor inside of a disruptive economy? And how do you think that changes the advertising messages that you use and where you choose to message?
Yeah, and I think Rachel and Kenny have done a great job of setting that up. First and foremost, I mean, the speed of which the game is operating gets faster and faster. The speed of which information is moving, and so yes, I think it's generational, but I think COVID has helped accelerate some of that. As Kenny mentioned, I think about a brand where you want to be part of a conversation, but also with aligning with either media companies or partnerships, and how do you bring continued value to a consumer? I don't care, again, if it's under 30 or 30 and above. You even think about what Nickelodeon did this past year during the NFL playoffs. I mean, for an old guy like me who grew up, watching grainy black and white, NFL as a kid to my NFL experience today, I didn't get it, but who loved it? My 10-year-old son, who I can't get to sit in front of granted we're Detroit Lions fans, but I can't get him to sit in front of it. So you see that disruption, and I fell in love with what I saw Nickelodeon do, and you saw that extend across the screens. Also, you look, as a brand advertiser. So one is working with publishers, social media publishers, and media, platforms like Overtime, Players Tribune, where how are we able to give value to the consumer that they can see now behind the scenes, or take that athlete off the field, the court, the ice, and how are they living their lives and bringing that value. We've seen that quite successful, platforms like that for the partnerships we do have, the NFL, the PGA Tour, very much so, and also esports. I mean, we're a proud partner of 100 Thieves, which is part of League of Legends. I mean, they're delivering a Super Bowl size audience every month on YouTube. And so to be able to, tap into that genre, obviously with a younger demographic, and do some unique storytelling and bring that value is some easy way for brands to disrupt, along with doing the blocking and tackling brand advertising. I mean, as a big brand, obviously we want to fill the top of the funnel, but you're not going to be filling the top of the funnel all day if you're not also thinking about middle down funnel conversion.
Got it. And for those of you scoring at home, I want you to pay special attention to what Casey just said, because he referenced an NFL football game. He's a lifelong Detroit Lions fan. I'm a lifelong Bears fan. And the Bears actually lost that game he referenced to the New Orleans Saints. So it was a sad day in my life, but life goes on. Life goes on. All right. So we touched on a lot of different things, and some of it which is around Gen Z. But before there was Gen Z, there was obviously the millennial audience. And Rachel, you and I had the chance to work together at Time Warner in the wake of the acquisition of Bleacher Report by Turner Sports. So if you think about that acquisition 10 years later, now it's no longer the millennial audience that's in people's basically main focus or attention. It's really what we call the Gen Zennial audience, so the combination of Gen Z and millennial. Mm-hmm. How do you think about the acquisition of Bleacher Report surviving after the course of 10 years in this media environment? What are the challenges for a business like Bleacher Report as part of AT&T Corporation? And what are the future opportunities for brands like Overtime as we look ahead to shepherd this Gen Zennial audience into the new world of sports fandom?
Yeah, so and we both have lived the evolution of the sports world. I think that when you go back to when Bleacher Report was bought by Turner, there it was really the emergence of digital advertising, right? That you needed a digital pairing with your linear television pairing. And so it was an acquisition that was not huge in scale. It was a $200 million acquisition for Time Warner, but it made all the sense in the world for Turner at the time. We had a lot of linear television sports rights, and pairing it up with a digital offering to have some digital ad impressions to then bundle with it, other ways of getting engagement for the advertiser. And so the market was emerging, it was shifting to digital. Now that seems quaint, right? Now it seems like, of course it was online. But back then, and also there was a technology component to the acquisition of Bleacher, which I think would not be there today. I mean, I think that the content management system, the CMS of Bleacher, was something that it had very rapid publishing, it had very local contributors, and that was something that very hard for usually traditional media companies to build true tech inside. And I think that that's probably less so true now. I think there's so much open source, there's so much more off the shelf tech that I think that the CMS that Bleacher provided and that gap that had to be closed and that they really could not have done in-house quickly enough. I don't know whether that would be true today. And so nowadays, you fast forward and Bleacher has been an incredible asset. I think that is one of those buys that the Turner folks were really, really happy with. It was one of those very happy deals where everybody, all the economics worked later on as well. And the team also was a good combination with the Turner team. I think that, so those deals are hard to put together. I think that when you look at, though, in the intervening years, there haven't been that many big sports acquisitions by the traditional media companies. And I think it's because, they focused a lot on trying to, build it themselves. Some of the stuff that's out there that has built big audience has gotten very expensive for the media companies, and the media companies trade at a certain multiple. And so when they go out and they buy companies, it has to make sense economically. And so there's a lot more probably trying things inside the realm of the existing company before going and buying external companies. But I think that, when you look at the viewership and how the viewership has changed, there's no question that the Gen Z audience that was, nascent when Bleacher was bought is now so dominant, and the way that they view sports is so different. And I have a 16-year-old, and I can't imagine him sitting through an entire game. And, and so something like Overtime, where it combines even kind of the culture of sports with the actual sports highlights and has, an entertaining kind of wrapper to it, is, I think, an important way of thinking about sports as it has to change. I think that in the near term, you are going to still see renewals of the sports rights because they still pull the advertisers. But I think that that shift in viewership is going to change some of the business models. And do I know exactly how it's going to change? I don't, but I do think that the growth of Overtime is certainly testimony to the fact that if you can find a way to create content for that audience that really is specific to them, you can really build a huge scalable audience.
Yeah, and we're starting to see that already at Snapchat, Kenny. And I think the idea at Snap is really just to break the mold and what the future actually holds. And Casey touched on it earlier, and I really appreciate him bringing up this whole notion about using television and mass reach vehicles to be at the top of the funnel. But then when I think about this Gen Zennial audience, let's say between 80 and 100 million people in the United States, hundreds of millions more around the world that use the Snap platform consistently. How do you think about Snap being able to deliver not just content consumption, but eventually actual product consumption as these users on Snap continue to age up and decide to lean into different products? I mean, how do you think about that, and how would you leverage sports in order to tell that story?
Yeah. So it's really fascinating, and Rachel touched on it that from a Snap perspective, whether it was insight or tremendous luck, like we're kind of like well positioned for this moment in time. And I reflect as a marketer who's been in the industry for a few decades. So much of the conversation about Gen Z now sounds exactly like the conversation about millennials, 10, 15 years ago. And as a marketer, both myself as a consumer marketer as well as a marketer for our platform, you're almost not in dereliction of duty if you do not have a strategy connected to Gen Z right now, connected to millennials a few years ago, and businesses that were smart and were well positioned are kind of reaping those benefits. Part of our story is that, using the US as an example, we reach over 50% of smartphone users. And years ago, the usage of mobile devices surpassed that of television viewership. And that trend is only going to continue. It's not going to be slowing down anytime soon. And from a Gen Z perspective, we reach 90% of 13 to 24-year-olds in the US and 75% of 13 to 34-year-olds in the US. And it's almost impossible to avoid the importance of this community, of this audience. Snapchatters have like $4 trillion in spending power globally, given our global reach. And oftentimes these folks are difficult to find elsewhere. So and they have, as we mentioned before, Rich, a strong passion and interest around sports. We've seen sports consumption, using the NBA as one example. Our sports content for the NBA grew like 80% in 2020 in Q3 relative to the year before. So that passion is high. The audience is big, it's scaled, it's critically important. And we feel fortunate as a platform to kind of be built for this moment. With a business that is, brand safe and private by design. It's built for mobile, like literally mobile only, and built for how these generations like to communicate and how they like to consume content. And to your point around brands, and Casey brought this up as well, in addition to driving that awareness, we have a pretty performant ad product stack that actually is built for those performance advertisers and marketers. So, and because of that, over 50% of our revenue is actually performance advertisers, which is kind of insane. Those are looking for app downloads, looking for installs, looking for e-commerce, looking for that attribution, and finding that in a kind of a curated and brand safe environment. And then leveraging, things like AR, as I'd mentioned before. So we're finding, our partnerships both with brands as well as sports leagues and teams working incredibly hard for us, because as Rachel mentioned, like those consumption patterns are switching. And folks are looking for, those insightful stories. They're looking for those highlights. They're looking to stay up to date. They're looking to share and express their fandom, and they're looking to do it in the way that's most native for them, which is through mobile and through communication with their close friends. So we're excited about kind of the opportunity, particularly in the sports space, both with brands and with publishers and partners, and see that trend likely to continue.
That's great.
And like one thing that I would mention is that it's not, while the viewership is totally changing, it's still the central importance to Gen Z viewers is still high. I mean, in terms of determining what they think is cool, what they want to wear, where they want to be seen, how they present themselves. So sports as a cultural icon is still like just as high with Gen Z as it was with millennials, as it was with the generation before that. I think that, but the viewership of the actual game itself, that is what I think is going to go through a paradigm shift over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's definitely a measurement issue more than anything else. At some point, we need unified measurement across all social platforms, all digital platforms, and television. Nielsen, tells us 70% increase in Super Bowl viewership through streaming, yet the overall audience was down. We have to tie those things together. And speaking of tying things together, I want to tie together a couple different threads we touched on along the way. Somewhat around sports betting that Rachel mentioned, and this whole notion of being on the top of the funnel that Casey mentioned. And Casey, I'd like to come back to you, because I think at the core of everything that Rocket does, and this is just one person's opinion, you make doing something like getting a mortgage fun. It used to feel like an arduous task to go to the bank and fill out a mortgage application. Now Rocket has made it fun. And to take it a step further, you've basically said to the environment, hey, look, let's make this participatory. Let's lean in. Even if you're not going to do a Rocket mortgage, you can still be part of our Super Bowl squares. So I really want to ask you a two-part question. One, how important is it from your marketing strategy to have something like Super Bowl squares out front and center as part of your messaging? And then secondarily, as you think about sports betting, which in some states is 18, other states is 21, as a marketing opportunity, is that something that you're going to keep an arm's length from, or is it something that you think Rocket Mortgage may lean into, maybe alongside your PGA Tour responsibilities?
Yeah, and Rachel earlier on really posed a great question for brands. You look at the absolute growth of online betting, and if you lean into it or not, that's something we'll continuously look at. Obviously, mortgage industry is very highly regulated, as is betting, but on the other side, what we want to do is lean into some opportunities. We've done a number of them over the years, Rich. I mean, we were the first brand to put a NCAA basketball game on an aircraft carrier. We partnered up with Warren Buffett a number of years ago and did the $1 billion bracket. We've brought a PGA Tour event to Detroit, first brand to bring an event to downtown Detroit. And then a few years ago, 2.5 years ago, we met with the NFL and we pitched them the idea of the Rocket Mortgage Super Bowl squares. It seems odd now, 2 years later, just how accepted now online betting is. Michigan is one of the states that just went, brought online marketing. But 2 years ago and change, we brought it to the NFL and we wanted to do it with or without them. Thankfully, we all agreed it made sense for us to work together. And so we did the Rocket Mortgage Super Bowl squares, partnered with the NFL. But for us, that's an opportunity. How do you lean into something that we all do, right? Whether you're 8 or 80, everyone's played squares. And how do you lean into just a great platform like the Super Bowl and bring something of value to fans? I mean, quite honestly, one of the biggest advantageous things about the Rocket Mortgage Super Bowl squares and meeting with the NFL was, now, this past Super Bowl was an anomaly. I mean, we haven't really seen a game that, let's be honest, come the third quarter, the end had somewhat already been decided. But here's an opportunity that, with doing a partnership and we got millions of people that entered that, you're able to sustain some viewership or interest via a second or third screen experience. So we're always going to seek those opportunities, to enhance our partnerships. And the Rocket Mortgage Super Bowl squares and with NFL is just a great example. And we're always thinking about, what's next. I mean, even though I'm just barely taking a breath from the Super Bowl, we're already thinking about what's next for Rocket Mortgage.
Well, for those of you who have the chance, make sure you go check out the Rocket Mortgage Classic in Detroit because it's a great event. It's one of the best stops in the PGA Tour and probably one of the best galleries I think I've been part of in my lifetime. So congrats to you, Casey, and all the fun you guys have at Rocket Mortgage. Rachel, I'm going to come back to you because, it's interesting when I think about what Casey does 24/7 and, what Kenny's doing 24/7. And they're utilizing some strategies that some direct consumer companies would already utilize or VC-backed companies would utilize because they can move more swiftly. And clearly you see that at Snap and with a tip of the cap to Casey and his team, they're doing it at Rocket Mortgage. But as you think about it, if you stepped out of your role as an investor and had an audience with Fortune 500 brands, how would you encourage them to move faster? And what's the why they should move faster? I mean, Snap and Rocket are great examples of people that are moving faster, but how can you talk to some of their peers in that Fortune 500 set to move faster? And quite frankly, what would you say to them?
I mean, the easy answer is to say move faster, take some capital and take some risk and use it as risk capital. I think that I would actually flip it back to the startups. I actually think that being that I was at Time Warner for 18 years, and I know what it's like to be the big company, there's often the question of, if it's not broken, why am I going to try to fix it? And so I think that it is a little bit on the startups to prove to the Fortune 500 brands that they can deliver as well as the traditional media methods, and that they aren't going to have egg on their face if they don't put their money into linear television, that they're still going to have just as much lift or return if they go to a new medium. And I do think, though, the way that happens is that people do allocate, some capital to take risks. And so I would encourage most Fortune 500 brands to really be thinking, okay, I'm going to take a pool, because I do think there is a paradigm shift that will not come back for this generation on how they're watching the game. And we didn't see it with millennials. I think that this is, social has really fragmented the viewing. And I think that there's a ton of viewing, but it isn't happening the way it used to. And so given that there is a paradigm shift, I would encourage folks to really take a bucket of, they have big budgets. We're going to say this is risk capital. We're going to try some things out. We're going to still ask the startups to tell me what are the return metrics that I'm going to be looking for with this risk capital, but I'm going to try it. And I'm going to try to make sure that there's first do no harm, that there's no harm to my brand. But I would encourage a lot of Fortune 500 brands to take an allocation and really try some things that, might look, off base, but give it a go, because right now there is this permanent shift, I think, happening in the viewership.
Those are great points. And Kenny, I think of Snap when Rachel makes those comments because, so much of what you do is rooted in, the engineering base that you have and all the innovation that Snap does consistently. But I wonder how you strike a balance between, some of the reach numbers, which quite frankly, I haven't heard you articulate live. I mean, those are massive penetration numbers against 13, 34-year-olds and 18, 34-year-olds. So how do you make sure you never, the expression in fishing is to spook them out of the pool. How do you make sure that while you're trying to innovate, you don't introduce something that's going to have a shock factor where all of a sudden people will reject it, like some other tech companies have been challenged with?
That's a great question. I actually, if you don't mind, wanted to tap a little bit on what Rachel said, because I think it's like really important. I recall, in most of my previous lives, and we try to hold the same true at Snap. We had like a media mix kind of like strategy and allocation where we would say, 70% kind of tried and true, 20% that is, kind of developmental, but is somewhat proven. And then like 10%, which is kind of like blue sky, that is innovation, that is like massive test and learn. And like that to me should be the mindset. And the shares of how you break that out may vary depending on your business and your consumer, but there should always be a kind of a thoughtful approach around innovation as a brand, to make sure that you're understanding like how you can have success in mediums that may be less proven. I think that's a critical kind of mindset that a marketer should have. But to your question, Rich, innovation is super in the lifeblood of Snap. It's a part of the DNA of the platform. Like literally invented so many things that are commonplace right now. Invented stories, invented ephemeral messaging. We're the first to do full screen vertical video ads. Mass AR adoption, like the list goes on and on. So I actually have the privilege of working in a business that has a massive orientation towards innovation, and we are constantly testing new features, new products and updates, with various subsets of our community to see if they're actually delivering the value that we're intended, and if they're having a good experience. And if they are, we scale it further. We actually risk, becoming a dinosaur if we don't innovate. That's literally, our responsibility, and making sure that we're doing it in a way that is delivering good value to our community. But we do a fair amount of testing, a fair amount of learning, and then we scale things that are really delivering value, and we learn a lot from our community. So it's not done in a vacuum, just a bunch of engineers and product folks. It's like what are problems that we can help solve for our community, and then how do we try to address that from a design and from a product perspective, and then how do we kind of continue to learn. It does require a mentality where you're going to fail a fair amount. Like you kind of have to embrace that. Have that mentality that like, hey, we're going to fail, but we're going to learn, and we're going to fail quickly, and we're going to learn quickly. But you have to have that mentality so that like your organization embraces this spirit of innovation, and knowing that like making those bold steps, those bold moves, and having that mindset is going to be a continued driver of growth, and that it's a safe place to do that. So it's something that's critically important to us. We are mindful of that consumer experience, but we also have like this mindset around innovation that is really permeated throughout our organization, and is critical, I think, for our ongoing success.
Lots of good points. So Casey, I want you to close us out here. So we're coming up on the top of the hour. And, I think back in our lifetime, we saw some material shifts in a sport we love like the NFL. We saw the Seahawks leave the AFC. We saw the introduction of the red zone, which really changed football watching and viewing behavior. As you look out, and understanding nobody really has a crystal ball, but I know you're on top of the trends more so than probably anybody else in the business. As you look out a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, what trends do you see today that you really think are going to have an impact on you as a marketer, and more broadly, maybe on sports generally?
Yeah, and I think Rachel and Kenny did a fantastic job of explaining a lot of that. I think about what Kenny just talked about relative to as a brand advertiser. I don't have the privilege of also being a media platform, but certainly as a brand advertiser, I absolutely agree with Kenny. Like a brand, if you're going to be, you have to lean in and work with media partners, and whether it's the social media platforms, content, networks and providers. Like over time, you've got to be able to lean in and raise your hand. I mean, at Rocket Mortgage, we meet with our, large media platform partners monthly, and we're always asking the same question, like, what is next? While you may be testing this at Snap, all right, how can we be a part of that? And if we're going to fail, we'll fail with you, and we'll figure it out along the way. And I think that's a fantastic way for a brand to be innovative, is to lean in with media partners and be that alpha or beta tester. And to Rachel's point earlier, I absolutely agree. And I look at myself, I'm a 49-year-old guy, and I have seen how my consumption habits, and I love everything sports, my consumption habits have drastically shifted over the last 5-10 years. It's not very often where I sit and watch a 9-inning baseball game anymore. And baseball is my favorite sport, but I'll catch the game across my second, third screen or whatever it might be. And so you've got, as a marketer, advertiser, it's not just about Gen Z, which is very, very important, because Gen Z for mortgage is going to be the future of first-time home buyers, which is the largest segment. But I also have to think about, the demographic, the Gen X, even, that, while we may not be the early adopter, we're in the mid adopter phase. And, we see a consumption habit shifting all across demographics. So you've got to lean in. Yes, you're going to have tried and true, but you have to also have, be realistic that you have to adapt with changing consumption habits.
That's great. What a great way to wrap up the conversation. So on behalf of Overtime, I just want to express our thanks to all of South by Southwest for letting us host this conversation. And then my personal thanks to my friend Casey Hurbis in Detroit, the CMO of Rocket Mortgage and Quicken Loans, Kenny Mitchell, the CMO of Snap, and of course, Rachel Lam, the co-founder and head of investments at Imagination Investments. Thank you to everyone, and have a great rest of the week. I hope the snow melts soon. Thanks, Austin.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thank you.